All right, so full transparency, I had a completely different episode planned today. Different notes, different outline, different conversation. But when something major happens in real time, you don't just ignore it and stick to the script. What just happened in Venezuela changes the conversation, and it needs context, not hot takes, not headlines, but actual history. So we're scrapping the original plan for today and talking about this, because if we don't slow it down and look at how we got here, we're guaranteed to misunderstand what comes next. And that's common knowledge. Common Knowledge Podcast, just a man doing the best he can with what he got. And one thing everybody needs to understand about this: America does not intervene internationally unless it's in our strategic interests. If there's no benefit to us, we do not engage, period. So whenever you hear we're doing this to stop a dictator or we're doing this to stop drug trade, red flags should be raised. Take Kim Jong-un, for example. Nobody is rushing to depose him. Why? Because he has a nuclear weapon. And that was probably the smartest move he could ever make to stay in power, because nobody wants a nuclear war. So dictatorship alone clearly isn't a red line. Which brings us to Venezuela. The real question is, what does America get? What do we gain? Historically, when the U.S. intervenes, there's almost always a profit motive or a strategic resource involved. Look at Iraq. What was in our interest there? Of course, oil. Let's not dance around it. That's what it was. We wanted their oil, so we intervened in Iraq. Now we're told the rationale for Venezuela is drugs. The stated rationale for this attack was self-defense and anti-narco terrorism. Self-defense and drugs. A self-defense narco operation. But here's the problem with that story. Cocaine does not come from Venezuela. Heroin does not come from Venezuela. Meth comes from Arkansas and Kentucky, but not Venezuela. Fentanyl does not come from Venezuela. Most of the cocaine comes from Colombia. You can't just say drugs are coming from Venezuela and not give me any evidence. I've been down that road before, and I will explain that later. Venezuela has mainly been a transit route, like for drug producers, not a producer. So if the drugs are the justification for bombing Venezuelan assets or seizing boats, then the obvious question is, where are the drugs coming from? We got a lot more countries to bomb. If the rationale is actually drugs. I'm going to say again, historically, Venezuela has not produced drugs. It's just a transit route. So the question is, when did they start mass producing these drugs? Where did they get the products from? And who else we bombing? Because if drug production now is a standard for military action, we got a lot of countries going to be bombing. There's a lot of countries that should be on this list. So then we ask the next logical question. What does Venezuela have? Venezuela has massive oil reserves, gold, diamonds, coltan, which is critical for all electronics, iron ore, and strategic access to a major shipping route. That's not nothing. That's everything. If the U.S. gained influence or control under Venezuela, that would ripple through energy markets, electronic supply chains, and global commodities almost instantly. It's an economic play. And that's what makes this dangerous, because it becomes a perfect cover story. All you have to say is he's a dictator, he's selling drugs. But we always know dictators don't matter and nobody cares about drugs. Otherwise, this list would be a lot longer. So when you strip away the fancy rhetoric and look at the incentives, it's fair to ask, is this really about drugs or is it about resources? I would argue it's about resources. Maduro has not been willing to play ball with the world. For those that don't know, and I'm not defending Maduro, I really am not. I don't know enough about the guy to defend him. I do know his predecessor, and the guy he patterns his style after is Hugo Chavez, who is a big socialist. Now, depending on who you ask, Hugo Chavez was a great leader or he was a failure. Now, what Hugo Chavez did was expand healthcare, education, and welfare. He was extremely popular with the poor, and he pushed for sovereignty of Venezuela. And more importantly, probably for the context of this podcast, he hated America. That's not fair. He didn't hate America culturally or personally. He just hated America politically. He was the guy who famously called George W. Bush the devil at the UN. But Chavez always sold oil to the U.S. Not the case with Maduro. It was more of an off and on situation where he would limitedly sell oil to the U.S., but his main customer was, wait for it, China. Now, one just may curiously ask themselves, by U.S. taking control of Venezuela, what bind does that put China in? If all China oil primarily comes from Russia and Venezuela, where does that money from China have to go now? That's just me thinking out loud, not making any accusations. Maduro comes from a background of being a unionized bus driver, from bus driver to president. And he has not been willing to budge and play ball with America. And when somebody doesn't want to bow down to your will, you have two options. Throw your hands up in the air and say, guess we won't do anything here. Or you can do regime change. And make no mistakes, this was a regime change. If you don't believe me, let's listen to Trump. Taking a news story from the AP.
We're going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition. So we don't want to be involved with having somebody else get in, and we have the same situation that we had for the last long period of years. We want peace, liberty, and justice for the great people of Venezuela, and that includes many from Venezuela that are now living in the United States and want to go back to their country. It's their homeland. We can't take a chance that somebody else takes over Venezuela that doesn't have the good of the Venezuelan people in mind. We're going to have our very large United States oil companies, the biggest anywhere in the world, go in, spend billions of dollars, fix the badly broken infrastructure, the oil infrastructure, and start making money for the country. And we are ready to stage a second and much larger attack if we need to do so. First attack was so successful, we probably don't have to do a second, but we're prepared to do a second wave, a much bigger wave, actually.
Let me point out, that sounds like war. That sounds like war. And historically, in order to have a war, you need the approval of Congress. I don't know how anybody can listen to that second wave comment and not think that this is a war. And the truth is out. Oil. I mean, doesn't get no clearer than that, man. America's going to come in with billions of dollars to fix the oil infrastructure. When you got a large stockpile of resources in oil, then hey, you watch out. Democracy is coming your way. But that's a regime change. Trump says the United States is taking over Venezuela. And this is where we have to look at our modern day record of regime change. It's not good. But if the question is, does American regime change work? The answer is sometimes. Seriously, the answer is sometimes. Regime change can work, but there's a very specific pattern. You have to be committed to the regime change. It is not a quick fix. If you're going to do a regime change, it's going to take decades of commitment. You got to have the political appetite and will to make it happen. Think Germany and Japan after World War II. You need total defeat. You cannot have anybody loyal to the old regime. You're going to have to completely destroy the old regime. And it takes years of occupation, because what you don't want is people loyal to the old regime to come back and raise up the old regime. And you're also going to have to invest in reconstruction, much like we did in Japan and Germany. You're going to have to invest in them folks' infrastructure. You're going to have to build institutions from the ground up. Those weren't quick interventions after World War II. That was decade-long commitments. Now contrast that with modern attempts of regime change that failed. Iraq failed. Libya failed. Afghanistan, oh, big fail. What do they have in common? We got rid of the guys in power, but the institutions weren't replaced with anything stable. You didn't get democracy. You got a power vacuum. You got militias. You got long-term instability. That's what you got. Now let's apply that framework to Venezuela. First, has the regime been fully destroyed? No. The military, the courts, and the security service is still intact and loyal to the government. Second, is the U.S. willing to occupy Venezuela long term? If you go by Trump's word, no. But successful regime change requires years, sometimes decades of boots on the ground. And third, is there a reconstruction plan? Are you going to rebuild the infrastructure? Only thing I'm hearing Trump say is oil. We're going to rebuild the oil infrastructure. If you want that government to be loyal to the United States, you're going to have to rebuild colleges, roads, bring in high-paying jobs. Much like we did to Japan. Like we rebuilt Japan so good. In fact, we rebuilt it better than America. We brought in manufacturing and technology to Japan. Are you going to do that to Venezuela? Again, I think the answer is no. Venezuela's oil infrastructure alone will take tens of billions to revive. Fourth, are there stable institutions ready to take over? Not really. Who are you going to put in power? We have tons of evidence of America picking the new leaders of regimes failing. See above all those countries I said. We picked the new leaders. All failed. Fifth, is there a broad local legitimacy for foreign intervention? Did the Venezuelans want us to come in? Did you have a large consensus of the local population? And that's the dirty secret, right? Regime change has to come from within the country. Any successful revolution generally comes when the people take up arms. And the answer there is no. Many Venezuelans who oppose the government do not support the U.S. military involvement. So now you finna have the enemy of my enemies being my friends. This ain't good. So that's gonna lead to a bunch of rebels and counterinsurgencies in Venezuela. Because in order to take over the country, man, you're gonna have to have boots on the ground. So my next question is, are you willing to expend U.S. servicemen's life for this? And my next question is, how in the hell are we gonna pay for this? Right now, the U.S. deficit is $39 trillion and rising. Who's gonna pay for this? Is this just the U.S. going in? How are we gonna pay for this war? Because you can say right now that, hey, man, once the oil gets to flowing, man, all the money's gonna roll in. But you still gotta get the infrastructure up and running. And that's still gonna come from American oil companies. And if you give them a tax cut, how much revenue you really gonna get from that? But on the back end, after the break, I'm gonna explain why I have a personal problem with this and what it reminds me of. And if you was around that time, it may remind you of this too. All right, I don't talk about this a lot, and I don't like to throw out my bona fides, but I am an Army veteran. I got into the Army 2000. That's when I enlisted. And in 2001, there was 9/11. And I'm going to be honest, when 9/11 happened, I was gung-ho. I was 110% in. Our country was attacked, and all you had to say was, we're going to get the perpetrators from 9/11, and I was in. Now, one thing that I just want to clear up about U.S. soldiers, we're not blind cogs in a machine. We have thoughts, but we follow orders. Ultimately, we follow orders. But for 1 second, don't think we don't talk among ourselves. We don't look at the news, and we don't put together things. We do. And another thing I don't like putting out, I am a disabled vet. Yes, I'm a disabled veteran, and I suffer from PTSD from my time in the Army. And one of the factors of that was because as a U.S. service member, I felt like I was lied to. Blatantly. When 9/11 happened, the stated goal was to bring the perpetrators to justice. And the orchestrator was Osama bin Laden. At the time, it was stated that bin Laden was in Afghanistan. We would later find out it was Pakistan, but the initial intelligence said Afghanistan. Now, units will later be deployed to various sections in what we call the land of stand. We had a lot of people deployed to Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and Afghanistan, all searching for bin Laden. My unit was slated to get deployed. We didn't end up going to Uzbekistan or Afghanistan. We backfilled members of the 82nd Airborne who were deployed, so we ended up doing a stateside deployment. Now, During that stateside deployment, you make friends with soldiers. And it's during wartime, so security is up. Your head's on a swivel. And all this was in 2001. But most of us noticed in 2003, a major shift in policy. The focus went from Afghanistan and bin Laden to Iraq and Saddam Hussein. Those of y'all may remember they sent Colin Powell, well-respected, decorated general, out there to carry weight for the lie that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. He was enriching yellow cake uranium. He was planning on a nuclear war. Spoiler alert, we will later find out that was not true. He was not enriching weapons grade uranium. It was a lie. Now, the generous among you may say, hey, man, that was just false intelligence. But if you're me, you would call it a lie. We're lied to. We were told something that was false. And I saw good men die for that. A lot of y'all don't remember. So many soldiers died during that conflict that they stopped televising coffins coming in because there were so many. Friends of mine, people I know, died in that war. And that's part of the reason why I got out the Army, because I felt like my life was expendable. A lot of my fellow soldiers died for a lie. One thing we don't talk about in war, and this is the honest to God truth. One of the deterrents of war should be human capital. Before you send your soldiers into war, you got to be willing to have a certain amount of those soldiers to die. Wars often become a battle of attrition. Historically, that's what they have become. You got to literally calculate, okay, is this worth losing lives? Now, the problem in the modern age is that we have gamified war. War has become push button. And you got all this technology, drones, and AI. So then it becomes easy for us to say, hey, man, just kill them. Because, hey, that strike in Venezuela only took 30 minutes, and we decimated a lot of that country. Carcass was in flames in 30 minutes. That is effective killing. But one of the biggest questions nobody's asking right now is, why didn't Congress have a real say before these strikes happened? And the uncomfortable answer is because we gave that power away. And I'm saying this with a level of knowledge because I was there. I saw it happen. Over the last decades, especially after 9/11, the balance of power was quietly shifted from Congress to the executive branch. So the president didn't just become the head of state and commander-in-chief in name, but in practice. The president became the default decision maker of war, surveillance, and national security. Now, a lot of people think this all happened under the Patriot Act. It didn't. It was a weird time then, guys, and these laws actually passed days between each other. So it's a lot of confusion about this, but what actually gave the president all this power was the post 9/11 AUMF, the authorization for use of military force. That passed 3 days before the Patriot Act. So they're often tied in together. Oversight became non-existent. It really broadened what count as self-defense and normalized emergency powers that were never meant to be permanent. We gave up so much. We gave up so much because we were scared. The country that claims to be all about freedom and power to the people gave up power to one man, the president. And the president at the time was George W. Bush. We were scared. We were legit scared, so we gave up power. And since then, every president has been abusing the power given to them by the AUMF and the Patriot Act. You guys don't remember a time before 9/11 where you didn't have to go to the butt-naked x-ray machine. You didn't have to take off your shoes in the airport. And like pre-9/11, the president always had the power to strike. Reagan did it multiple times, but you had to notify Congress at least 48 hours before you did it. But since 9/11, man, the lines between limited action and permanent action has been blurred. And that's what's going to happen in Venezuela. Is this a war? What is it? In order to take over a country, you're going to have to put boots on the ground. It's war. I don't care what you call it. It's a war. Now, the Venezuelan government says this is a Western imperialism attack and a hostile takeover. And I'm going to be honest with you guys. Two things can be true. And this is a case of a yes. They're right. This is Western imperialism. Run amok. This is forced capitalism perpetrated by the U.S. government. What's going to happen next? I don't know. But if you would allow me to throw out some hypotheticals. So hypothetically, if Trump really wanted to remain in power for a third term or beyond, maybe if he's a wartime president, all he has to do is say, hey, man, we can't have an election until after this war is over. Now, here's the thing. Technically, he can't do that. That's against the Constitution. The only institution that can delay a presidential election is Congress. However, I would like to remind you, back in 2020, Trump suggested that we delay the elections due to COVID-19. Didn't happen, but it was suggested. So let's just say Trump just disobeyed the law. I mean, you know, there ain't no precedent for that, but let's just say he disregarded that law and said, hey, man, we can't have an election until after this war is over. And there's a precedent for this. That's what Franklin D. Roosevelt did. He served more than 2 terms because of the Great Depression and World War II. Now, he died in office, so that's why we had the 22nd Amendment that limits the presidents to 2 terms. But let's just say Trump says, hey, it happened before, it's going to happen again. And I'm guessing at this point, man, a lot of Americans will have a problem with that. There'll be mass protests. But luckily, Trump has gotten the American public used to his own military being deployed on U.S. soil. So at that point, you just deploy the military to quash any protest. And democracy quietly dies. All because this strong man had to stay in power to keep the U.S. government afloat. And typically what happens when you got a strong man like this, you pass it on to the next leader, Baron Trump. Honestly, I don't think it will happen because I think Trump will probably be dead pretty soon. The man's getting close to that age, and Father Time is undefeated. But what I am saying is, if we keep giving control to the executive branch, nothing good can come from it. They say history doesn't repeat itself, but it damn sure echoes. And to me, a veteran, this looks a whole lot like we did the second time in Iraq. But I reserve the right to change my mind. Maybe more evidence will come up. Maybe they'll pop up evidence about this drug trade that was happening in Venezuela. But as I told you before, in the beginning of the podcast, I've been lied to before by the commander-in-chief and the whole chain of command that was supposed to protect me. So excuse me if right now this brings up a lot of PTSD for me. And that's the Common Knowledge Podcast. updated weekly. I will post a regular podcast, things we need to leave behind in 2026 next week. Thank you guys for rocking with me. If you like the podcast, please like, share, tell your friends. Y'all be safe out here, and let's see what's going to happen next. Peace.